You ever thought about that one time you passed gas because you've had way too much McDonald's and you not only embarrassed yourself at the dinner table, but you also inadvertently caused a storm an ocean away? No? Well, science says you did, and it's totally your fault. Hi, I'm Dan, a physics graduate, and if you want to know why it's your fault, it's because chaos theory says so. And if you've never heard of chaos theory, let's think about it. Last week, on the Christian think tank, these gentlemen, Kyle and Jihan, talked on the importance of thinking together. But, more interestingly, introduced to us chaos theory. But if you missed it, well, no worry. We'll look at it again and we'll explore it in a different way. We'll get to see how we can wonder about chaos theory before we even know what it is, how it looks, and why we even care. In general, when you're doing anything anywhere, the result is predictable and is related to the action or input in a straightforward way. For example, I'm recording this video right now at this exact spot, at this exact angle. And if I chose to record it at another angle, then it's
Not
not
that
that
much
much
different.
different. But what if it was? What if me recording at that slightly different angle would change the video drastically? Would change my life drastically? Well, I wouldn't know. Chaos theory is a study on unpredictable and complex systems. It focuses on understanding how, in such systems, a small change in what we start with, the initial conditions, can, over time, lead to big, significant differences in what we end up with. An example, as you can see now, is the double pendulum. Here is an animation with a double pendulum with several starting points that are very close to each other. Over time, however, the trajectories vary wildly, to the point that if you play the clip backwards from the middle, you would be surprised that they had such similar beginnings. Another way to see this is with the butterfly effect, or as I prefer to illustrate, as I did earlier, the dinner gas effect, where we see that the flap of a butterfly's wings, or you passing gas at the dinner table, would set off a chain of events that would lead to a storm on the other side of the world.
Told you it was your fault.
I'm not making this up, at least not the butterfly part. Chaos theory and the butterfly effect are well studied in the fields of maths and sciences. And these chaotic systems are said to have sensitivity to initial conditions, which is what we said earlier. Small changes lead to stark differences. Now, that's not to say that for these systems, every small change will lead to vastly different outcomes. So, there's no need to kill all butterflies or ban all farting. No. This effect merely highlights the possibility of these happening, but not their plausibility. Just because it can happen doesn't mean it will. This effect merely serves to illustrate its potential. This can be seen in many natural phenomena, such as the weather and climate, financial markets, and the traffic patterns that bother you on a nearly daily basis. Point is, because of how varied the outcomes can be, given a small amount of change from the beginning, it's not something worth predicting to pinpoint accuracy, especially over larger and larger timelines. It only takes one false assumption or one unaccounted factor for the prediction to be thrown wildly off and become useless. The best that one can do, really, is to just observe patterns and infer from them, and to make predictions with some room for error given those patterns. In particular, chaos theory studies the patterns that appear from these systems, the factors that contribute to them, and how they may arise. Some of these emergent patterns include fractals and attractors. Now, I won't be talking about them in detail, but they are useful and they sure are pretty. Now that we are a bit more knowledgeable on chaos theory, let us now see how it applies to thinking as these guys pondered right after the break. Did you know that the Christian think tank has a discussion group? Well, now you do. The Christian Think Tank Discussion Hub is a group on Facebook designed with you, CTT viewer and enjoyer, in mind. In it, you will find threads discussing the different content that we release on CTT, including this video and the others that we've released in the past. In there, you may share your insights and comments, as well as your ideas for future things that we can post out there, and we might even include them in future videos. Further, it is a safe space for you to ask questions regarding philosophy, theology, apologetics, and biblical studies, and you can get to join a community of like minded individuals, Christians, and thinkers out there for the truth who want to develop in the growth of the Christian mind in order to tackle all these different worldviews today. If you are a Christian that longs to provide a reasonable defense for the Christian faith, as well as to welcome opposing ideologies and have reasonable, mature, civil discussions on this matter in the quest for truth, which is ultimately God's truth, then head on over to the Christian Think Tank Discussion Hub. Links in the description and the comment section. We'd love to see you there. Okay, back to the video. And we are back. So, first, let's see if our thoughts altogether constitute a chaotic system. Indeed, thinking is a conscious process of mind. Our thoughts are thus influenced by factors that affect our mind. So, our experiences, our circumstances, our memories, and even our other thoughts. These things and all the other things that populate our mind and affect it thereby affect and influence our thoughts as well. Further, we can say that our thoughts also have initial condition sensitivity. You ever had a tip of the tongue moment or just a general moment where you want to remember that small important detail, but it really just slipped your mind, slipped your memory, and you can't help but want to look for that specific detail because it's important? Those happen a lot of times. And indeed, our trains of thought can differ drastically based on those important thoughts that can sometimes slip from our minds. And there are lots of times we don't even notice it. There are times that if we had thought differently, our trains of thought would have been entirely different. Because our actions are influenced by our thoughts, you can then imagine how real world chaotic systems can be sensitive to your mind. Think about it. If you knew that your gastric release could eventually whip up a storm, then if you're a good person, you would want to contain your flatulence. In other words, your thoughts can make or break typhoons. I'm not saying they will. I'm just saying they can. Please don't sue me. Okay, let's try to be a bit more serious. So, a lot of times, it's hard to predict our thoughts and where they could lead. Just like in chess, we can make brilliant moves as well as blunders, and they can happen at pretty much any time. But also, like in chess, we can observe patterns emerging from the thoughts if we engage in thinking enough. These patterns eventually become our assumptions, our biases, and eventually our worldviews. Truly, our thoughts are a lot like chaotic systems. But I also say that They differ in some ways. For one, our thoughts are ultimately conscious processes. They can and are influenced by our intentions. And through them, we can dampen and even overcome other influences. We can focus, we can pay attention, we can deliberate, and we can even try something unfamiliar. Moreover, while the factors that influence our mind can take our thoughts in certain ways, they can just as well restrict our thoughts in other ways. For example, our thoughts don't usually wander into thinking about how to survive on Mars because our everyday experiences don't lead us to consider that line of thought as relevant. Well, for now at least, I mentioned it, so it's something that we think about for at least this brief moment, I suppose. Lastly, we have reason and logic. So, to some extent, we can understand the world around us and make sense of it in our minds. Then we can use logic and our reasoning to set paths for our trains of thought to travel along. And we can even apprehend other thoughts, even thoughts that we haven't thought about before, thoughts that we're unfamiliar with, and thoughts that we disagree with, and we can examine them critically instead of just tacitly seeing them and taking it in for granted and accepting them. Overall, thoughts can be a lot like chaotic systems in their condition sensitivity and their unpredictability, but their chaotic characteristics can be subverted and controlled as well. That's where the importance of thinking often and especially thinking together comes in. We as individuals and as humans consider thinking at times to be difficult, tiring, frustrating, overwhelming, or in one way or another, just not to our liking. We like going with the flow. We enjoy being on autopilot and we prefer staying in our comfort zones. This can lead to our detriment. We can adapt destructive behaviors and harbor harmful thoughts when we don't re examine and rework what goes on in our minds. When we take them for granted, we tend to be overly comfortable and even confident in our thoughts, including our mistakes. When we get overly comfortable and confident with our mistaken thoughts, we can start regarding our ideas and even ourselves as being too good, that people should listen to us without question, without scrutiny. And when we get carried away with this, dangerous ideas and tendencies and biases start to form. Some of the trickiest heresies and most dangerous cults originated from no one keeping these thinkers in check. One way we can avoid these is to be challenged, and we can challenge ourselves to think. But it is also hard to challenge ourselves to think because challenging ourselves is a decision that we make which relies on our thinking. And if that's the problem, well, it's a feedback loop that doesn't solve itself. And this is why we must think together. Because we all think differently. And by thinking differently, we find it easier, if natural even, to challenge one another. For one does and thinks things a certain way, and another does and thinks things another way, if at all. And finally, we see the value in events of collaborative thinking, such as organizational meetings, scientific panels, group discussions, and even religious councils. We can see why they're important. It's because these events challenge us to think more and sometimes to think otherwise. But over and above those things, they encourage us to think together because with how easily our thoughts can become chaotic systems, how easily they can inherit chaotic characteristics and unpredictability, it is easier then to quell the typhoons in our minds if we think together. Chaos theory is a fascinating field of study. Tonight, it has helped us understand and be more mindful of the things that we start with and where they can lead, including and especially our thoughts. The next time you encounter an unpredictable situation, remember what we discussed in this video and think about it. What are some of your thoughts on chaos theory? What are some examples of chaotic systems that you've seen in your life? How did you deal with them? How do you deal with your thoughts? And in what ways can we think together? For each of these questions, think about it and share your thoughts with us over at the comment section. And thank you for having me. We'll see you again soon, and until then, keep thinking. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'll have a storm to quell in the toilet.